Hi folks, my name is Phil and welcome to Grounded, the series which looks at airlines of yesteryear. This episode will take a look at the second incarnation of British Island Airways. The original British Island Airways had been merged with Air Anglia, Air Westward and Air Wales to form Air UK, which was covered in an earlier episode. Shortly after the formation of Air UK in 1980, the United Kingdom itself was hit by a recession, forcing Air UK to make cuts across the board, with the charter division one such area facing the chop. Air UK's charter division had been inherited from the original British Island Airways after they themselves added charter flying to their repertoire in 1979. The charter fleet consisted of 4 BAC-One-Eleven jet aircraft which following the merger had quickly been repainted in the new Air UK livery. Air UK were keen to offload the division, with one major benefit being the removal of a fairly expensive aircraft type and allowing the standardisation of its already eclectic fleet. By disposing of the charter business, Air UK would be able to focus entirely on their scheduled flight operations and hopefully weather the storm. In December 1981, Peter Villa, the managing director of Air UK and former MD of the original BIA, agreed in principle to acquire Air UK's charter operations from their parent company, British and Commonwealth. B&C had already placed the charter division into a holding company, BIA Limited, ahead of any potential sale. With the help of a loan from B&C, Villa would lead the management buyout and British Island Airways Mark II would begin operations on April 1, 1982. The 4 BAC-One-Elevens were quickly repainted into the British Island Airways livery, the same livery that they'd worn under the original BIA barely 3 years earlier. The 89-seat 400 Series 111s were, according to Villa, valuable in securing business for the airline as he believed that there were already too many 737s in the UK inclusive tour market. He wasn't wrong. By 1982 there were 32 Boeing 737s being used by the main UK charter airlines, with nearly 20 more to follow over the next 2 years. It was believed that the smaller 111 would be more attractive to the independent tour operators, as the aircraft would be easier to fill up and therefore require less of a commitment from these smaller firms. It was also hoped that the 111 would be attractive to larger tour companies who wanted to serve new destinations, and the smaller 111 would be easier to fill when trying out these new routes. BIA would operate Air UK's existing charter programme for 1982, giving the new airline time to find new customers and secure contracts for itself. The airline had got off to a fairly good start and carried over 184,000 passengers in its first year. BIA would of course operate charter flights for tour operators, but also operated flights on behalf of other carriers. 1983 would see BIA operate some flights on behalf of Air Florida, who despite being in a spot of financial bother wanted to keep a European network. Air Florida's financial woes meant that the airline was forced to reduce its long-haul DC-10 fleet from 4 aircraft to 1. After finding a partner in BIA, they would still be able to serve several European destinations. BIA would operate a BAC-One-Eleven from London Gatwick to Amsterdam, Brussels, Dusseldorf and Frankfurt, with the flights connecting to Air Florida's Miami flight. This arrangement continued into 1984, however it ended when Air Florida collapsed later that year. BIA soon found a new partner, however, operating European flights on behalf of a new airline, Virgin Atlantic, from that November. These flights would see service to Maastricht in the Netherlands, acting as a feeder to their Gatwick-based long-haul operation. The Virgin 111 would also visit Basel and Salzburg before being returned to BIA in April 1985. Another 111 was leased out to Airways International Cymru, operating from April until November. The story of the Welsh-based charter airline is riddled with twists and turns and best saved for another day, however. One might think that BIA was spreading themselves very thin, however the airline acquired 2 more 111s. These were the larger 119-seat 500 series variant. 1985 would see the airline acquire 2 more of these 111s, with one arriving in May and the second in October. The October arrival would be sent out on duty with British Caledonian, where it would operate a weekday service until the end of May 1986. The aircraft would, however, be used by BIA on weekends. By 1986, British Island Airways was operating 8 BAC-One-Eleven aircraft, 4 89-seat 400 models and 4 of the larger 500 models. These aircraft had all come from various other operators including Bahamas Air, Quebec Air, Laker and Courtline. The last 2 airlines are going to be covered very soon, by the way, so subscribe if you want to catch those episodes as they land. 1986 would also see an additional 111 come in from the Romanian flag carrier Tarom. This was a BAC-One-Eleven, however, built under licence in Romania and was with BIA from June until the summer season ended in November. A year earlier in 1985, BIA acquired Sicilian Sun Limited, trading as Island Sun. The tour operator specialised in package holidays to Corsica, Sardinia and of course Sicily, as well as other Mediterranean destinations. They had been experiencing some financial problems and was acquired by BIA for just £2. It was a move similar to that done by Courtline over a decade earlier, where the airline steps in and acquires its principal tour operator in order to save them. Unlike Courtline and Clarkson's Holidays, however, Sicilian Sun wasn't a complete basket case that would drag the airline down. Sicilian Sun accounted for just 4.5% of BIA's flight programme, and it was hoped that by acquiring the company, BIA could turn it around into a valuable part of the group. BIA was an independent airline, supplying charter seats to various tour operators. By acquiring one for themselves and bringing it in-house, they were reducing their dependency on contracts with third-party companies and reducing their exposure should they lose any of these contracts, something which was looking increasingly likely, though through no fault of their own. In 1986, BIA's four largest customers were International Leisure Group, Owners Abroad, Pegasus and Viking International. ILG already had its own in-house airline, Air Europe, however still used British Island Airways quite a lot. It was Owners Abroad and Viking who were about to go their separate ways. Viking International, as mentioned in the Air UK episode, were primarily a seat broker who also had their own tour operator, Unijet. Viking, through a partnership with Air UK, established Air UK Leisure. This new airline, founded in 1987, would begin operations in 1988 from London Stansted. The Owners Abroad Group, established in 1973 as a seat broker, had, through various acquisitions, become a fairly sizable tour operator by 1986. Taking a route similar to Viking, Owners Abroad established its own in-house charter airline, with Air 2000 taken to the skies in 1987. I wonder whatever happened to them. While the formation of these two airlines was a bit of a blow to BIA, they weren't really directly competing with them. Air 2000 was focused on Manchester and Air UK Leisure was at Stansted. Both Owners Abroad and Viking would continue to use BIA where necessary for the time being. It wasn't all doom and gloom, however. BIA had successfully floated on the stock market, giving the company a nice cash infusion. BIA had been profitable throughout its existence, with a steady increase in profits year on year thanks to careful expansion. At the time, the core of BIA's business was chartering aircraft for tour operators. The tour operators would pay BIA to operate the flight. For BIA, it was a fairly risk-free way of doing things. If they didn't get paid, then the flight wouldn't operate. They would also be paid the same fee regardless of how many seats had been sold. The big risk was, of course, if the tour operator decided to cancel contracts and move to other carriers or, in the case of Viking and Owners Abroad, launch their own. The UK charter market is seasonal. The summer is very busy, but in winter it's considerably quieter. An airline needs to ensure its aircraft are being fully utilised or else the cash stops coming in. BIA wanted to reduce its dependency on seasonal flying, so in April 1987 gained approval for its first scheduled routes, with flights from Gatwick to Palermo and Catania. These were at the time the only direct flights to Sicily from the United Kingdom. 1987 would also see the nation's flag carrier British Airways acquire British Caledonian, the country's second largest airline. A result of this was that BA was forced to relinquish a number of routes for competition reasons, and this gave BIA an opportunity to expand further into the scheduled market. BIA applied to the UK Civil Aviation Authority for route licences on 5 routes from Gatwick. These were Glasgow, Edinburgh, Manchester, Jersey and Nice. If granted, the BIA scheduled route network would keep 3 of their BAC-One-Elevens fully occupied. With this in mind, BIA decided to invest in some new aircraft. In February 1987, BIA penned a deal with ILFC for 2 brand new McDonnell Douglas MD-83s. Unlike the rest of the BIA fleet, these aircraft would be leased with delivery scheduled for early 1988. At the time, there wasn't a UK operator of the type. BIA would be beaten to the punch, however, with the infamous Paramount Airways becoming the type's first UK operator. The Mad Dog has always been a less popular choice for UK airlines. Aside from BIA and Paramount, Airtools would be the only other operator of the type. British Jet doesn't count as they were Maltese and didn't operate the aircraft themselves. The same applies to Air Scandic, well, except the Maltese bit. British Island Airways was also the airline of choice for the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. In fact, she would travel BIA on her tour of the UK in the run-up to the 1987 general election. She had previously used the original British Island Airways in 1979, making use of their handily paged Art Heralds. In 1987 she would use the BAC-One-Eleven, seen here arriving at Newcastle and here arriving at Cardiff. Despite being Thatcher's airline of choice, the PM didn't do BIA any favours, as the Civil Aviation Authority rejected all of the former BCAL scheduled routes that BIA had applied for. Despite that setback, the airline was awarded rights to offer scheduled flights to Malta from both Manchester and Gatwick, with services to begin the following April. 1988 was a very tough year for BIA, with the airline making its first loss since the management buyout from Air UK back in 1982. BIA made a pre-tax loss just shy of £2.9 million, compared to a profit of nearly £2 million the year before. There were many factors for this, with the most damaging one being the near-total meltdown of Europe's air traffic control network, which was buckling under the increasing number of flights. This was further compounded with the nighttime closure of Gatwick's primary runway for resurfacing works. The nighttime closure of that runway and generally odd layout of it, its parallel runway and further parallel taxiway, nearly spelled disaster on the night of April 12, 1988. With the primary runway 08 right closed, what was often called the emergency runway 08 left was in use. 08 left was generally used as a taxiway, only being brought into operation when its right-hand sibling was out of action. To be honest, during my time as Gatwick-based crew, I can't recall ever using it, as it was used that little. 8 left sits in close proximity to 8 right, with a taxiway running parallel to 8 left. The runways are so close that they cannot be used for simultaneous operation. In fact, the two runways and taxiway are all squeezed into an area just 290 metres wide. 8 left was similar in size to 8 right. It also had runway lighting approved for visual approaches, but no instrument landing system. At just before 25 minutes past 10 on the night of Tuesday the 12th of April, a BIA BAC-One-Eleven was inbound from Venice and cleared for a visual approach and landing on 8 left. In the left-hand seat was a first officer undergoing captain conversion training, with a training captain on the right. Neither pilot had previous experience landing on 8 left. The aircraft approach was normal until around 750 feet, when the aircraft's track was adjusted to the left, towards the green lights believed to be the centreline of the emergency runway. As the aircraft touched down, the pilots realised their mistake, that they had in fact landed on an actual taxiway and tried to bring their aircraft to a stop. As this was going on, a British Airways 737 had been turning onto the taxiway. The 737's commander had seen the 111 on approach. Doubtful of the aircraft's landing track, he slowed the 737 down and told the co-pilot to be ready to get the aircraft off the taxiway. A few seconds later, when they saw the 111 really was coming at them, they steered the 737 to the right and onto the grass. The nose and right main gear of the 737 went onto the grass, but as soon as the left main departed the taxiway, it got bogged down, leaving the wing and rear fuselage hanging over the taxiway. The BAC-One-Eleven managed to stop well short, approximately 190 metres short of the now stuck 737. Aside from the Boeing needing towing out of the grass and replacement underwear for both sets of flight crew, there were no injuries. While I could go into great detail about this incident, and I may some other time, there were several factors which led to this dangerous situation. One of the biggest was that under normal operations, with 8 left being used as a taxiway, it would have green centreline lights. This, combined with the proper taxiway lights and red stop bar placement, give a dangerous impression at night. In these photos from the UK AAIB investigation, the aircraft, in this case a helicopter, is lined up to the taxiway. 8 left is visible to the right of it, and 8 right is barely visible to the right of that. The lights are from construction works which were taking place at the time of the incident. This was, as far as I'm aware, the only serious incident involving the airline. Steering this away from air crash investigation and back to grounded, this wasn't the only problem for BIA during the year. The introduction of their shiny new MD-83s were delayed, resulting in BIA shelling out on expensive subcharters. The first aircraft arrived in December 1987, however the second wouldn't arrive until May 1988. These were pressed into service with flights to new charter destinations including Cairo, Luxor and Tel Aviv. Impressed with these aircraft, a further 2 Mad Dogs were ordered, with one arriving in December and the 4th the following April. The 167C MD-83 was held in high regard by British Island Airways. It was quieter and seen as more comfortable than their existing 111 fleet. It had a larger capacity and a greater range too. BIA and Island Sun were already scouting out locations in East Africa, which could potentially be home to some new exotic destinations. BIA's management believed that with the growth of the inclusive tour market as a whole, that there was bound to grow within it a sector in which customers are prepared to pay a reasonable amount extra for a product of genuine higher quality. It also felt that this demand was likely in the relatively affluent southeast of England, in other words, the area around their Gatwick base. Island Sun, following a management shake-up, had begun to focus more and more on premium packages, with their BIA flights having club-type catering with free drinks provided to passengers. Island Sun also began selling package holidays to the Caribbean and Mexico under their new Simply Exotic brand. Naturally, BIA couldn't provide transatlantic flights, and so passengers were put onto scheduled US airlines, where once in the States could connect onto their destination. As their plans for a large scheduled route network were now fairly knackered, combined with their additional MD-83s, BIA found itself with too many planes and not enough work. 2 111s were duly shipped over to France on a year-long lease, a clever move as BIA would earn more through that than operating them for themselves. At the same time, the airline reduced its nighttime operations whilst also increasing their charter fees for those flights. The effect was twofold. BIA would make better margins on these flights, but also had more recovery room padded into the schedule should there be any overnight disruption like the year before. 1989 saw some shake-up in both the charter and inclusive tour market. Several companies had merged or gone out of business. Others, such as Owners Abroad, had instead directed more holidaymakers onto their own in-house airline, Air 2000. The BIA management had always seemed pretty on the ball and began to offer a consolidation service to various tour operators. Basically, instead of relying on a single tour operator to charter a whole aircraft, BIA would instead offer small blocks of seats to tour operators. For just a minor increase in administrative effort, this move increased BIA's aircraft utilisation and also found support from the Association of Independent Tour Operators. It was a popular move. Smaller tour operators who had either been priced out or declined access to the in-house airlines of other tour operators, unable to charter an aircraft for themselves, had to find seats on carriers such as Dan Air, an airline who will be covered in a future episode, but also had the dubious and somewhat unfair nickname of Dan Dare. Now, these smaller companies, some of which were little more than a family-run travel agency, could get a fair price on airline seats and have a chance to grow. During the year, BIA introduced Island Class on its scheduled routes. The service aimed to provide a high-quality service to its business travellers. Island Class passengers would receive a glass of champagne to welcome them on board, along with complimentary newspapers and an enhanced food service with a hot meal and complimentary drinks. In an attempt at keeping their growing capacity in check, the airline sold 2 400 Series 111s to Okada Air of Nigeria. These would be balanced out with the return of 2 aircraft that had been on lease to TAT of France. The airline's 4th MD-83 would be delivered in March. Later, one of the fleet would be chartered by Air Tanzania for a month that December. BIA had on several occasions over the years been approached by various parties regarding the takeover of the company. According to Managing Director Peter Villa, on average 2 or 3 proposals a year, some genuine, some not so genuine. International Leisure Group, owner of Air Europe and a BIA customer, had been in serious talks with regards to acquiring BIA. Air Europe had begun as a charter airline but had expanded massively, expanding into scheduled operations and even had long-haul ambitions. They saw BIA as an ideal takeover target. While BIA didn't have much of a scheduled route network, it was the 4th largest slot holder at an increasingly congested Gatwick. Acquiring them would give them these crucial slots which they could use to expand their own scheduled services. At the time, ILG, the UK's second largest tour operator, was still a fairly big customer of BIA despite having its own airline. The secondary benefit of acquiring BIA would be that ILG could have complete control of its charter capacity and scheduling. Despite protracted talks of nearly a year, an agreement just couldn't be reached and the two companies went their separate ways. As the next decade dawned, things started to look a bit bleak for British Island Airways. Well, the industry in general, to be fair. While the UK hadn't technically hit the recession yet, the economy had begun to slow down. The side effect of this was that less people could afford to book a holiday, leading to a decline in the inclusive tour market. The ongoing crisis in the Gulf, combined with Saddam's sabre rattling, made war look increasingly likely, further putting people off travelling overseas. Oil prices had begun to rise, in turn so did the price of jet fuel, which further put the squeeze on BIA. Having taken a big hit on finances over the last couple of years, combined with some large single-time expenses and losing tour operator customers to their own in-house airlines, British Island Airways ceased operations on Thursday the 1st of February 1990. So, what went wrong? British Island Airways had been well managed, the airline's expansion had been carefully planned and the airline was pretty much living within its means. BIA had been profitable every year since the 1982 management buyout until 1988 when it made its first loss, and a big one at that, just shy of £2.9 million. There was a good reason for that, however. BIA had signed a deal on some new MD-83s, and while they were leased rather than owned, they still had to pay deposits on them. The company had also made some big-ticket purchases, which at the time made sense. In January 1988, they spent £2.1 million on a new headquarters. The 1.9-acre site adjacent to Gatwick Airport would be home not just to the airline, but its tour operator, Island Sun, which would move over from an expensive site in central London. The introduction of the MD-83 meant spare parts would be required. BIA, having already spent £1 million on spares, spent a further £1.34 million on a spare engine. All of these expenses made sense and were perfectly justified. Unfortunately, they ate into their cash reserves at a time when things were starting to go south. Despite the airline's expenditure, it was still expected to have been profitable during the year. However, it was hit hard by both the nighttime closure of Gatwick's main runway and subsequent reduction in capacity, as well as the implosion of European ATC, which had been struggling to cope with an ever-increasing number of flights. There was also problems at McDonnell Douglas, resulting in the late delivery of some of the new Mad Dogs, meaning BIA was forced to charter aircraft from other operators. The biggest issue for the airline was that two of its main customers formed their own airlines, Air UK Leisure and Air 2000. This wasn't really a problem at first, however both airlines gradually expanded, taking passengers away from BIA. As the economy began to slide in 1989, Viking and owners abroad would rely more on their in-house airlines, reducing costs and boosting their own airline businesses. It was a combination of factors all coming together at once which led to the demise of the airline. The airline's move to new headquarters was a sensible one, as well as the investment in new aircraft and associated spares. The problem was those huge expenses ate the company's financial reserves. In theory, this shouldn't have been a big issue as the airline was profitable. Unfortunately, the ATC problems and delivery issues meant that BIA struggled to make the money it needed to top up its finances. Then the IT holiday market imploded thanks in part to the imminent kicking off of the Gulf War. BIA's main customers had shifted more passengers onto their own in-house airlines. Add to that, BIA had moved away from whole aircraft charters, meaning that the airline was left operating half-empty aircraft on behalf of other tour operators. It is rather frightening how a well-managed airline collapsed so quickly. Some have speculated that they would have fared better if they'd made a deal with the International Leisure Group. What some seem to forget, though, is that ILG were now in their Tony Montana in Act 3 phase and would themselves collapse the following year. BIA had previously depended too much on contracts with third-party tour operators. They tried to correct this by moving away from whole aircraft charters and instead selling blocks of seats in bulk to tour operators. While this opened up the airline to smaller firms, it also increased the airline's exposure to reduced demand. Prior to this change, the single tour operator chartering the whole aircraft assumed the cost. BIA was paid the same regardless of if it had one passenger or a full load. By moving away from whole aircraft charters, BIA were exposed to a bigger financial risk. If only one small tour operator picked up, say, 25% of a flight's seats, then BIA were liable for the 75% that was unsold. This was a bit of a gamble, but again it made sense at the time. The problem here was again the reduction in business from its larger tour operator customers. BIA could of course use its own tour operator to fill seats too. Unfortunately, Island Sun was a bit of a lemon. Nowhere near as bad as Clarkson's, which had dragged down Courtline, but still quite a liability. Island Sun struggled to turn a profit during their existence. BIA brought in a new management team to try and turn Island Sun around, but it was a slow process and the group collapsed before we could see if it was working. Island Sun only accounted for around 5% of BIA's charter business, however. In order to have survived the early 90s recession, they needed a much bigger tour operator of their own, or a collection of smaller ones. That is the risk assumed with small independent airlines. Unfortunately, in 2021, there aren't any small independent charter airlines left in the UK. We have two large charter carriers, formerly three, all part of their own large travel companies. Small independent tour operators are either forced to pay a premium for seats with them or instead bring in carriers from overseas. Maybe it's time we had a new guy on the scene. Until next time, thanks for watching.